This is Marley Preston, here with you today to talk to you about all the things that you are wrong about. If you have a trigger, we will pull it. Today's guest, Willow VanHelsing of the Dark Light Divide, former modern feminist and former SJW, gone right. Today's subject, sheltered youth. Now, there's so much to say about sheltered youth in Western society. We can see all the hopes of the Western world going down the toilet. Why? Because suddenly, somehow, perhaps we can blame the boomers for this one, but our balls dropped off. Somehow, as we sit on the toilet, our balls just dropped off. We didn't notice and we flushed them down the toilet. As a nation, and indeed not only as a nation, but as Western civilization. So, Willow VanHelsing, you were a former SJW. You reluctantly admit this because it is embarrassing, and I can understand that. So, do you want to tell me about your experience of going from the SJW to a jaded right-winger? I'm not saying you're a right-winger, but they would say that, and I think you understand what I mean.
Right, yeah. I don't know if I can consider myself a far right-winger, but I'm, like we've established before, somewhere in the right of center, you say?
Absolutely. No, I would definitely put you there.
Yeah. Well, yes, it's hard for me to stomach that, to even refer to myself in the past as a SJW. It's difficult, but I think that all I was striving for even then was, I believed in equality then. I don't anymore.
When you say equality, you're not talking about 2 is equal to 2. You're talking about human equality. You
Right,
don't think
and I'm
that
not...
any 2 people are equal, and I would agree with you on
Exactly.
that.
I'm not talking about equal rights. So calm down, you little... getting your panties in a twist over there.
We don't disagree on equal rights. We should all have equal rights, but that doesn't guarantee equal results, as we said in the previous podcast, which had to do with feminism, and somehow we got off on a tangent because one of our guests was wrong.
Right. Some people, genetic garbage, as I like to call them, are inferior. And I didn't believe that before. I wanted so badly to see the best in everybody. I wanted everybody to be able to break out of the stupidity. And it took real life experiences to see that some people are just inferior.
You're lucky in that respect.
Thank you. I think that I am, because most people aren't able to break out of that or even acknowledge it. There aren't really there's a ton of ex-feminists, but there's not a whole lot of people who are able to shed that entire mentality.
The victim role? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, that's part of it, sure. But
entitlement.
Yes, that's part of it too. But I just mean in general, like all of these human service workers and SJWs trying to preach about how we're all created equal and we're all people are the same, and nobody is above or below anybody else, and that's just simply not true. And it took real life experiences.
The results show that.
Yes, and it took real life experiences for me to see that. It took me trying to invest in other people in hopes that they would change, and
the endless ring of disappointment with others.
Yes.
Seeing potential that wasn't there.
Seeing deceitful, shady snakes claim about how or claim how they want to change and they want to do this, but their actions spoke louder than their words. And a lot of them also just don't want to change, and they want to continue to be shady and deceitful.
Well, do you think that people maybe are that way and don't even recognize it within themselves? I mean, people are strangers to themselves.
Absolutely.
I mean, Socrates said that, and Nietzsche said that.
Right.
It's been an observation. It's the eternal grim echo of history that man does not know himself generally.
Absolutely. It takes observation of other people and your environments, your environment and everything around you to be able to really discover who you are. It's not something you can do solely just exploring yourself.
It seems that it's actually harder for one to know themselves than it is to get to know other people. Because even if you get down to, like, you'd think that on that premise that self-centered, narcissistic people know themselves more than anybody else because they're self-obsessed. But in fact, they're too self-obsessed to know themselves because they don't see their own downfalls. They don't see their own weaknesses, their own flaws.
Exactly. I agree with that. So, going back to what I was saying, I wanted to see the best in everybody, and I wanted everybody to have a fair shot and be treated as just like there's no race, only the human race. That was very much my mentality.
Well, I still believe that. I just think that we're not divided into races. We are divided, though, into, you could almost say it's special, between people who can know and people who can't. And when I say that, I actually mean people who can be self-aware and people who can be aware of their surroundings because they're not too solipsistic. They're not to the point where they basically act as if they're the only ones who they can be sure exist, living under that sort of impression. Now, getting back to the subject at hand of sheltered youth, I think that trigger warnings are a big issue because trigger warnings shelter the most fragile of people from free speech because they're afraid of everything. We have a culture of kids and young people who are afraid of everything, and when it gets down to it, they're even afraid of the idea of being wrong. Like, being wrong is like a monster under the bed to them, or it's a creeping specter that broke into their house. But yet, of course, they don't want a gun to defend themselves from it. But going off on a tangent, what do you think, Willow?
I think that with these trigger warnings, the word trigger is exploited, and it's contributing to the butthurt syndrome that's plaguing our society. Everything is becoming a trigger. It's true, though. Everything is becoming a trigger, and it's things. Everyone is afraid of hurting people's feelings, but people's feelings need to be hurt. But by avoiding, like, to me, when I hear trigger warnings or stop because you're triggering me or whatever, that's avoiding facing something head on. It's hindering.
It's anti-intellectual to boot.
Yes, and it's a hindrance from personal growth. A trigger is something that brings somebody back to a dark place or a dark, unpleasant place. That's what it's become, but that's not what, like...
That's not even bad, because you have to confront your fears. Whatever happened to that whole confronting your fears is the healthy way to go about it?
Right, absolutely. And I don't understand, like, it's... what it's become and what these social justice warriors are bitching about. It's such little, minute, like, unimportant, irrelevant things, like fucking body shaming and things like that.
First world problems.
Right. Because when I think of trigger and what a trigger really is, I think of like a veteran hearing a firework go off and it brings them back and sets them off to that place. That's what an actual, real, valid trigger is. It's not, you hurt my feelings because...
Yeah, when I think of a trigger, I actually think of my gun that I'm going to use on the next person that breaks into my house. I mean, maybe I'm being insensitive here. But yeah, you have a great point. These people with real triggers and have real PTSD. I mean, these people are non-vets and shit like that.
Right. So, like...
And yeah, women get it too, and you don't have to be a veteran. You could be beaten by your husband or whatever. But from what I've seen, women don't, I would trust somebody less if they were the type to, brag or tell everybody about their victim role, unless they wanted to get out of it. And if they don't want to get out of it, then they're being disingenuous as far as I'm concerned.
Exactly. And it's what a slap in the face to these people, to these veterans, to these warriors who actually fucking fought and put their life
Yeah, it used to be called shell shock.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now it's like it's shaming for all of these things and it's everything, like everything is becoming a trigger. Everything is becoming offensive. And
well, it's been said by some intellectuals. I think Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, the atheists in our midst, that they're pretty famous, or Christopher Hitchens was. He said he didn't see the argument in the words "I'm offended," because saying "I'm offended," he's like, what does that have to do with anything? You're offended. That's not an argument. It's got our youth living in a fantasy world of feminism and man-spreading and otherkin. I'm a dragon. No, how far are we going to go with this shit? Come on, we've gone too far. And you need to wake people up, because when you're an SJW or you're a feminist or you're an otherkin or a dragon, and you have a bunch of people that agree with you, you're not going to grow. And this goes back to personal growth and everything. But I think we live in a generation where personal growth is stunted and it's not allowed to go on, because hurt and pain and being offended and being angry is a part of being a fucking adult, people.
Right. It's facing it. You have to face these things or you're not going to grow.
I'm angry every day. I'm an adult. I'm 33 fucking years old.
Basically, we all need to get the fuck over it. Everyone has things that personally bothers them for whatever reason. A lot of it, I understand, has to do with the way that you're brought up and the things that you see around you. But to continue to be offended by absolutely everything, and to make up, like a lot of SJWs, they make up a lot of this shit. And it's like, aren't there more important things that you could be using all your passion for? That's what I discovered, and that was part of me breaking out of that, because... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, to go on with this, I think that people like us, like people who are X-Yers, I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, you're an early Gen Y, and we're kind of sick of this shit, and you know what? We're not going to say, well, why are you offended? We're going to say, well, that's not a fucking argument. We're going to say, deal with it. Or, in my case, I'm going to say, good. Hope you don't fucking like it.
Right. But in my past, I had taken pity upon these people, and now I say tough shit. There are real world, real life problems that are much more important than...
Homeowners are losing their homes. They're going into default. We're billions of dollars in debt as a nation. We're involved in unjust acts of war and violence in foreign nations that we shouldn't be involved in. But yet, man-spreading.
Right. If you want to, the SJWs, if you want to talk about social injustices, you're looking in all the wrong places. You're looking in all the wrong fucking places.
Yeah, and all these
You're
wrong
not-
places are in the fucking Western world.
Yes, you're not
Why
gonna
don't you look in the fucking Middle East for your
Exactly.
injustice?
You're not going to find them here because everything, I shouldn't say everything. Most things here, it's just,
We've narrowed it down to first world problems. And maybe we can take care of those things, and that's fine. Like, gays are treated like shit, trans people are treated like shit, sure, fine. I personally think the race thing is actually becoming more and more less of a problem. Or less and less of a problem, excuse me. And the gender thing is less and less of a problem. Feminists have very few good points.
right.
And they bitch about how the fact that women are not taken seriously. But maybe it's because they make it hard to take them seriously when they're bitching about man-spreading and the male gaze and shit like that.
Right.
Because where if they weren't gazed at by these men, they'd be bitching about that too.
This is true. I just have a problem with the whole shaming thing. Like, everything has become turned into shaming. Body shaming, penis shaming. Apparently, there was a thing about lube shaming, about people who can't produce, women who can't produce enough natural lubrication that they need actual lubrication and to pick on that or whatever is lube shaming. Are you fucking kidding me?
Are you fucking kidding me? You're talking about vaginal dryness? You're gonna make a huge big SJW subject out of vaginal dryness. Come on. Are you serious? And you know what? If we're gonna shame people now, I'm gonna shame you guys for a second. You should be fucking ashamed of yourselves. And I hope that I get death threats and shit, because I'd really like to see you try it. You guys are pussies and your balls fell off a long fucking time ago. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. You have real people with real problems. You have real post-traumatic stress and people who go overseas to fight these battles that largely nowadays are unjust. The last just war we had was World War II. But yet, you can't really take that seriously. Everything's a big joke with you fucking young people nowadays. And yeah, I'm a curmudgeon. I'm a curmudgeon. Good. Fuck you. I hope you don't like it. I hope that bothers you. I hope I ruin your fucking day. Fuck you. But, on a lighter note, I would like to bring this back to Willow VanHelsing with the background. Like, you being a former SJW, do you feel that you were brought up by an SJW? Like, how did you get there? Because, like, I feel like influence is, like, a huge part of this, because we didn't have this years ago.
Right. Well, my circumstances are pretty unique. My mother does not identify as an SJW. She's also purposely keeps herself uninformed and doesn't pay much attention to politics, but we were reprimanded if we said the word retard. And it's interesting because my father and my mother are polar opposites, and they're still married, and I was raised in that household with them.
And college sweethearts, nonetheless, which is really
High
odd
school
that they're
sweethearts, yes.
high school sweethearts. That's really weird that they're still together if they have nothing in common.
Right, and there were so many times that they were very, very close to divorce. And I don't know if it has to do with the Christian thing and them not wanting to divorce because of the stay together for the purpose of the kids and whatnot. But that's irrelevant for the point I'm trying to make. Because my father was raised from... my father's Puerto Rican, and and he was raised in a slightly racist household, and he still says the N-word all the time. And the N-word. See? Habitual. That's habitual, because I was taught to say the N-word and not nigger. Now I can say nigger. I don't really give a fuck, because... And I don't consider myself a racist person.
Well, I come from a family
Nigger,
of fucking niggers.
nigger means, exactly, nigger means an ignorant fuck. Like, anybody can be a nigger, but whatever. Oh, I can't wait for the hate on this one. So my mother, we were very sheltered, and my mother's the type of person who she wanted to hold our hands crossing the street until we were 16 years old. I was only allowed to listen to certain kinds of music. I wasn't really allowed to hang out with people. I had to stay in this little bubble, basically, and it deprived me.
You have the whole, like,
He's a bad influence. She's a bad influence.
Oh, absolutely,
thing.
absolutely. And I was interested in, I was interested in metal, and it was frowned upon. Although my dad's the one who got me on Black Sabbath, but I don't know, whatever. That's a different story. But so it was difficult for me because I got mixed messages my whole life, and I didn't know what the fuck to believe or where to go. And
So you could say you're sheltered, but you sort of like your mom was trying to shelter you, and your dad.
my dad really just didn't give a fuck.
Didn't care.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he just didn't give a fuck, and I always kind of wanted that because it was like you could leave the house wearing whatever the fuck you wanted. It didn't matter. None of that mattered. He didn't care, but at the same time, I will say he was a very hardworking man, and he always made sure that we had what we needed. We may not have had what we wanted, but we had what we needed.
That's a great subject to bring up. I mean, I think that a part of the whole sheltered youth thing is having everything you want and confusing what it is that you want and what it is that you need.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a fuck ton of that. Everybody feels they need their iPhone. They need the internet. I mean, come on. Really? And they don't know how to talk. What they need is a vocabulary. What they need is some fucking social skills so they can talk face to face with one another. Because it seems that, like, there was a time when I had to just switch to texting. And when I didn't have texting, nobody talked to me anymore. Just suddenly. I think it was like 2006. Nobody talked to me anymore because I didn't have texting. I wanted to call people and be a person.
Right.
Learn how to be a person, people.
That's part of the internet age. It has reshaped how we are and how
I think it's turned America's youth into a bunch of gray aliens that don't have mouths. You know how they're like sometimes they're not depicted with mouths. It's like that's because the people on that planet just developed texting like 3,000 years ago.
Especially
You know?
especially Generation Z, they're fucked. Like, they're absolutely fucked. They have no
You're
appreciation.
going to see a lot of 30-year-old versions in the future. I mean, don't you agree?
Yes, they have no appreciation for anything. But then again, everything was also handed to them on a silver platter. There's 6 and 7-year-olds walking around with iPhones. Most of them do.
Is that a thing?
That's
Really?
that's a
I don't
thing.
have kids, so I don't know.
That's the thing. I have nieces. They're both 3. They go to a daycare, and the daycare goes up to, I think, 12 or something. And my sister-in-law was telling me that there are 5-year-olds who have to check in their iPhones and their iPads upon entering this daycare center. Now, if that's not unsettling,
that is extremely unsettling.
and I feel like the internet has brought great things to us.
Yeah, it's a compendium of all human knowledge.
But it's also enabling us, and it's stunting. It's stunting our growth a little bit.
It's stunting the growth of our character, but certainly the thing that perplexes me.
I'm sorry, but we're all a little bit brainwashed by it, though, and we all depend on it to a degree, and that's just become part
I think
of
actually the
modern-
positive thing about the internet is the fact that you can watch whatever you want to watch. With TV, you get what they feed you. So yeah, there's some good things about the internet that definitely television didn't have. But the thing that bothers me is people don't know how to talk anymore. Just talk, you and me. You're right in front of me. We're looking each other in the eyes right now. What a fucking concept. But then again, I'm 33 and you're 29. We're basically in the same age group as where we used to do this.
is where I just imagine like kids nowadays just texting each other, even though they're right in front of each other. I don't know, like I know I'm actually joking, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were really the case.
Right. Yeah, it's
Sheltered youth, people. Your mouth is only good for talking and sucking dick, apparently.
what I think needs to be done. I really don't. There's no hope for Generation Z. There really isn't. The only hope left is people of our age or people older than us, just continuing to speak out against it.
It all
And
started with the hippies, in my opinion. And the hippies are the ones that are in power now. And they're fueling the pussification of America's youth.
this is true. And Marley likes to call me a former hippie, and I don't know if I don't.
Second wave, like 90s hippie.
Right. I don't really even understand what the term hippie really means, but like I still believe in universal love. And that's kind of what it was.
Well, nobody's perfect.
But I'm also I'm a slightly hateful person. I have a lot of hatred. And I did, when we first met, we met several years ago, by the way, and I was a little bit
a lot different. No, we're closer now because you hate people like I do.
right, and we parted not on purpose, but we just kind of lived our lives. Like you went your way and I went my way. There was no animosity or anything. But when I came back, everything had changed with me, and it was real life experiences. I like to put myself in situations that give me that challenge me, yes. And I was homeless for a while, and I lived in a tent in Skid Row in Los Angeles. And that was one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life. And I wanted, because my heart bled. And this was post-transformation that I lived a traveler's life.
But that's not even just nomadic. That's like hobo shit. Why would somebody aspire to be a hobo? I think you're wrong for that, personally.
It was a life experience, and I try not to live my life with regrets because everything is a lesson, and that's part of my personal spiritual beliefs. I got everything I deserved. A lot of really shitty things happened to me in that time period, but it's because I made a lot of stupid decisions, and deciding to live in a tent in Skid Row was a stupid decision.
The conclusion with America's youth is you have to let them fail, and you have to let them feel the pain that comes from that failure.
Exactly. You can't hold their hand forever, and you can't shelter them, and you can't... what you're doing is you're lying to them. If you're trying to shelter and protect, you're really not protecting them. And what I said earlier about
because eventually, particularly if you're a parent, you're going to die. And then you're going to leave this kid who knows nothing in this world without you. Because you're not going to be able to help them. You're going to be dead. The worms are going to be eating you. And then the wolves prey on your child. Think about that, fuckers.
You're trying to keep your kids locked in this one room where everything is safe. And one day they're just going to gain curiosity and they're going to break out of that room and they're going to go into the deepest, darkest dungeons of hell. And they're not going to be prepared and they're not going to have what they need to defend themselves because you have kept them from learning about all of the demons that walk the earth, the grim reality,
or the not only that, but to be more specific, the grim reality that eventually you're going to die, and the only thing you have to leave behind is not an immortal spirit, but the memory that you leave behind. And we become more and more mediocre, which is strange. I mean, our numbers become more and more mediocre. There's more and more mediocre people. Mediocre just means medium or average. But there's less and less people breaking the mold. And we live in a dying culture. We have to create new culture, and we have to preserve the old culture that was worth preserving. This young generation is drawn to art majors because art is one of those things that people consider to be so objective or so subjective that anybody can be an artist. So therefore, you can't fail at being an artist. And in an age like this, you'll have less people majoring in the sciences. You'll have less doctors. You'll have less free thinkers, less philosophers. I mean, how many philosophers that live now can you think of? We're living in a dying culture. Our culture is dying. It is almost dead. We need to beat the chest of this dying culture. We need to bring back and sort of skip over this Gen Z shit. I refuse to stand idly by and allow this generation to ruin our culture. A sheltered culture produces nothing. And sometimes they do worse than that. They produce weakness. They produce disease within the culture, which is this fear of everything. Even the fear of being wrong, thus the trigger warnings. And I think if you're a free-thinking individual, it is your duty to deliberately trigger these people. Trigger them. Stand up for human dignity. Stand up for everything that the West was built upon. It is part of being an adult to be angry most of the time. You can't shelter people from that, lest you stunt the growth of their character. And Willow, you yourself have said, as a person who has gone through the system, you've been addicted to some pretty fucking heavy drugs, and I can't begin to know what that's like. I don't know what withdrawal is like. I've heard it from ex-heroin addicts and shit like that. But the way from there's a pattern that I'm seeing here that you can't get out of it. But it's not only because these people who are addicted to heroin have weak addictive personalities, which you had and maybe you still have, and I can understand addiction. I mean, I've struggled with alcohol myself, but the system itself tells you not to take responsibility for your own actions, which is way beyond me.
Right, I agree.
It traps them in a perpetual state of addiction.
It does. And
it takes away your guilt.
It doesn't take away your guilt. They try to tell you that it will take away your guilt. First of all, I take full responsibility for my actions. I don't know if I believe that addiction is necessarily a disease, and I did before, but I don't know if I believe that now. But I don't
think that it is a disease.
Right, no, but I want to get back to what you were saying. I take full responsibility.
I'm going to come back to this then.
Okay. But I take full responsibility for my actions. A lot of the bad things that happened to me throughout the years of addiction were my own doing, and it could have been avoided. And there are plenty of people, somebody that I consider my brother is one of them, who've gone through horrible things and have never resorted to escaping. And that's all I was doing.
Hats off to them, because they're fucking strong people.
Absolutely, and I can't even comprehend that, because all I was trying to do was run away and not exist and not face or merely exist and not live and avoid reality and avoid that pain. That's what I was doing. But going back to what you were saying, yes, because when I went to these therapists and everything, they were quick to tell me, It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. And then it was like, well, the reason you're addicted is because your brother molested you your entire childhood. Well, be that as it may.
Any little thing that may happen to you
that means if you have any trauma at all, it's that trauma. It's not you.
It's enabling. Like, them telling me that, it made it worse. And I could go on a rant about therapy and shit like that, because there's all kinds of things. It was like, oh, do you think that the reason that you're attracted to women is because the male influences in your life, your father didn't care if you dressed like a whore, and your brother molested you? I'm like, well, actually, I thought that the reason I'm attracted to women is because I like tits, but that's beyond the point. Yes, it's a painful truth that they accommodate the victim role. They
They give a good story for the victim role.
Yes, they, like I've said before, they hand it to you like a warm blanket to hold on to and keep you warm for the rest of your life. God forbid you face the fucking cold.
Yeah, and it throws you into the pit of reliving this over and over and over again. Because in order for somebody to get out of a bad situation that's cyclical, you have to be made uncomfortable to get out of it.
And they teach you that, and they teach you that in rehab, and they're like, avoid triggers, avoid things that remind you of these things that might make you want to use. Well, the best success I've had in my life, and I haven't used heroin in years, and the best thing I could do for myself when I stopped going to therapy and all this stuff is facing all of it head on. Facing it, going those places. You're not a stronger person if you avoid being around people. If you're an alcoholic and you avoid being around people who are drinking for the rest of your life, you're a stronger person if you don't avoid it, but if you go to those places and you are able to coexist with these people who are drinking and strong enough to not drink yourself. You're a stronger person. I don't give a fuck. I don't care what all of you fucking people who are like all fucking butthurt syndrome plaguing society, like I said before.
Yeah.
It's true. It's butthurt syndrome is rampant. Watch out. It's contagious. Be careful. Don't get butthurt syndrome.
Absolutely. One of the things I wanted to address, and I will address, is the fact that I don't think addiction is a disease or an illness. Because if it were, I mean, people don't say, I'm going to kick you out in 10 days if you don't fucking get over your lupus or your fucking cancer. But they do say it about people who are alcoholics or people who are addicted to heroin or crack or whatever. I'm going to kick you out for your lupus. Damn it. I'm going to beat the shit out of you if you don't get over your fucking lupus. I mean, come on. It's not a disease.
I think that some people are what's the word I'm looking for?
Determined?
God damn it. See, all the drugs fucked up my brain. Predisposition. Have a predisposition towards addiction. And yes, there's environmental factors. There's genetics. But at the end of the day, it's a choice. And I think that human beings, and we learned this in college, and I went to college after rehab. I didn't go to college the traditional right after high school thing. But human beings are hardwired to feel good. Like, you're hardwired for pleasure. And drugs, scientifically, give you that pleasure.
We want to feel good.
Serotonin and all of the shit that I forgot that I learned in college.
Serotonin, dopamine, blah, blah, blah.
Blah, 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 blah. You get the gist. But one of the things I learned in college in my sociology of addiction class was that human beings are hardwired to feel good. I'm sure it wasn't exactly those words, but it's true. But at the end of the day, it's a choice. And yes, some people have a predisposition towards
Addiction?
addiction, but it's interpersonal.
It's individualized because people, I guess, like say 1 to 100, most people feel 80 all the time. And then if you have somebody who's like a 40 or a 30 all the time, then you have a drug that takes them up to 90 and then lowers them back down to a 30 or a 40. It makes the 30 or 40 feel worse. But life is hard, and we have to learn to cope without these drugs. And it is a struggle, but we can't shield the Western society's youth from struggle. As I said before, adults are perpetually angry, sad, we feel despair all the time. We don't have parents to look after us and take all of our responsibility from us. But maybe there is a beacon of hope, because I do see a lot of libertarians in the current generation as well, a lot of free-thinking individuals. As long as there's one individual in 100 that wakes up and sees the light and sees the dark, indeed, the dark. Life is very dark, and it's sad, and it's hard. We can't shelter our youth from that, because they're going to have to deal with it eventually. And when they do, it will be a personal apocalypse to them. Their world will fall apart, and they will not know how to deal with it. To conclude, the parents have to realize, too, that the kids aren't always going to be all right. And most of the time, after your death, they're not going to be all right. And we can't just shelter them from the horrors of the world, for it is an irreversible stunt to the growth of their character.
Right. And one of the biggest lies that you can tell youth or anyone is that everything's going to be all right. Because the truth and the grim reality is that nothing is ever going to be all right. There's always going to be hardships. There's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be bumps in the road. There's always going to be...
It's a part of growth.
Right, and it's a part of life. There's always going to be people. Like, this is all people. This isn't things. This is people that get in the way, that cause problems, that make it harder, that complicate life, and stunt personal growth.
So, I must conclude that we must trigger these people, because we know that these triggers really are nothing at their root. Words, mostly. Apart from manspreading and the male gaze, which are sort of nature. But let's use words. Like, say, faggot, nigger, dyke, spick, tranny, honky. All these things, all these words are just words. And I remember the old saying, which I don't even know if this current generation is familiar, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me, or words will never hurt me. What happened to that? I remember when parents used to teach that rhyme to children. We need to teach it again. The world is a harsh place, and in many cases, the things that mean to hurt you are a lot more than words. And to defend yourself from those things, maybe a gun's a good idea, but that's another subject. The grim reality is, when living, you're going to hurt. Life includes suffering, and the suffering makes the fruits of life sweeter. suppose the suffering is more analogous to vegetables. They don't taste as good, but they're equally necessary, if not more. But how are we going to recognize this when we have these blockers that are our parents, and maybe they're boomers or Xers? Which is, honestly, I would expect more from the Xers. It is wrong to exclude self-knowledge from your repertoire. Nowadays, parents want to teach their kids the ABCs at the age of 3 or 4. But they don't want to teach them the horrors of the world. They want to shelter them from the horrors of the world, which will lead to their downfall. Parents, after your death, there will be nobody to look over your children. Don't overprotect them. You are sentencing them to failure. Failure that you could say is worse than a creeping pestilence. It's more dangerous than anything to challenge them with. They need to be challenged. They need to hurt. Hurt is a part of living and growing. You hurt, and no greatness has ever been accomplished without hardship. Hardship is something that this generation needs to acquaint themselves with. What are your thoughts, Willow?
I feel like the only hope that we have is to not deprive our children from these horrors, but introduce them to them and teach them the skills that they need to face them rather than avoid them and avoid the reality that is the horror. Life is a fucking horror.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to be accomplished in life, a lot of happy things in life, but we
Sure.
need to get past the horror of it first. And I think that maybe the best thing for children is for the parents to reveal their hardships as a result of their own bad decisions. Like, everybody says, you and me, we both agree that people can learn not only from our own hardships, but the hardships of the people we see around us, our friends, our enemies, our parents, our family. So maybe parents should share their hardships as a result of their bad decisions.
Absolutely. And we're the product of the decisions that we make. We are a manifestation of the decisions that we make, and I talk about this a lot on a daily basis. It's part of how I got to where I am. And I don't know, maybe if my parents had a different approach, I would have found my path sooner. But my point is, the best thing that you can do is contribute to the exposure. Don't shelter, expose. That is going to be the only thing that is going to break the cycle.
To conclude, I will end on a solemn note. A song by myself. Security is rape, because it truly is. You are raping your children, metaphorically speaking, by keeping them from the horrors of the world, because you won't be able to shelter them when you're gone. This is a song called Security is Rape.